All right. I am so excited. Every time I get a chance to do an interview and talk with someone interesting, it's a little gift to me to be able to get to find out a little bit more about that person. But in this case, I've had a chance to talk to you before and I wanted more. And so today I get the chance to bring a very special person to Association Chat. And I want to just share a little bit of background. So conferences are funny. You can go and plan and you map out exactly what you're going to do, what you're going to learn, who you're going to meet up with. But later you'll go back and you'll say, wow, I learned so much more, or I met this person that I never expected to, and the things that stick with you are oftentimes different than what you think they're going to be at the outset. So a few months ago, I attended this conference in Toronto called Collision. And Collision's all about cutting edge tech and innovation. And I was excited because I got to do a little bit with IEEE's entrepreneurship and interview people. But it's talking with today's guest, Jason Williams, that left me with so much to think about, that I had to bring him back because he is an expert at encouraging innovation within a community setting. He was the executive director of the Central Indiana Innovation Group called Centric. Now, Centric's mission was to increase recognition of the state of Indiana as a global center of innovation. And the way that they were going to do this was by equipping individuals and organizations with the critical thinking skills and cultural frameworks needed to drive that innovation forward. So they had innovation workshops, an annual conference. And Jason, you were just doing amazing things, teaching design thinking, customer experience mapping, visual thinking, gameplay for ideation. This was all part of the programming that helped increase the ability of Indiana's workers to problem solve and think critically. Today, he's a partner at InnoPower. Did I say that right?
That's correct.
InnoPower? Yeah. Yes. An organization building inclusive innovation ecosystems in Indiana and beyond. He's also assistant director of the Society of Innovators at Purdue Northwest that serves the innovation communities in Northwest Indiana and Greater Chicagoland region. Jason's become the absolute go-to person if you want to talk innovation in Indiana and beyond. I will say that, and beyond. And so welcome, Jason. Welcome to Association Chat.
Yeah, okay. Thanks again. Pleasure to reconnect and chat one more time here. I'd say likewise. Really enjoyed the first time around and connecting at Collision early this summer. And look forward to speaking to you today.
Well, it was such a gift. It was like the last day of Collision. And we got a chance to connect through Lauren and to be able to sit down and get to know each other a little bit better. And that really stuck with me, finding out about you, finding out about what Centric was all about, and, discovering a little bit more about how you'd been purposefully building this community around innovation. And I was just like amazed at the work that you'd done, at your focus. And I had so many questions. So first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about Centric itself. Like, where did that whole idea come from? And how did you get involved in that in the first place?
Yeah, thanks. And I guess, I know during that introduction, obviously, my involvement with Centric directly, past tense, but Centric is certainly alive and well, is still serving Central Indiana as far as that innovation community. So going back, almost 12, 13 years ago now, called The Origins of Centric, there was a gentleman in the innovation space that had recently left the corporate world himself and was trying to do more strategic consulting, really helping other companies with their innovation strategy and development. I was the U.S. marketing director for a large global consumer products manufacturer at the time. Keter Plastic out of Israel happened to have a presence in the Midwest and in Indiana. And, I was a client of his. There were a couple other national and or global companies that were clients of his. And really the origin point of Centric was Collidia, was this firm working with these local companies with out-of-state parent companies where they said, hey, it's really time to invest in innovation. But if we're really going to invest in innovation, why would we continue to use the service provider in Indiana? And so really, we were born out of that frustration of innovation does happen here. Why should a company have to think they need to go to Boston or San Francisco to get decent innovation services? And so, I was one of the original invitees, if you will, and then kind of turned, founding organizer. I can't claim to be the founder, but certainly a founding organizer of a handful of us that we like to joke we formed a meetup before meetup was a thing. Just a group brown bagging it, getting together for lunch and sharing best practices around, new product development and, basically innovation, just talking shop. And that just grew over the years from 5 people brown bagging it to, 15 people and charging ahead of time for lunch to, hey, let's invite a speaker in, and, then developing into what Centric is today with, formal series of workshops and training and annual conferences. So it was great to see that growth over a decade or so.
So as this was growing, you, of course, had to figure out who are we inviting into this? And, how do we identify the right people? How do we get the right projects started? Mm-hmm. And so how did you go about that in the first place? Because I know a lot of times, people are they just trying to get as many people as possible to be involved. And sometimes you need to be a little bit more focused. And with your, sort of intention and mission, you want to get a certain type of person probably involved, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say early on, the first many years of Centric, it was, kind of all naturally fell into place. I mean, it really mm-hmm. was more word of mouth, attracting, folks from each other's networks and kind of the like-minded or the innovation-minded folks that kind of got it. And I would say it was an outlet that, if folks were coming because they saw a growing, meetup or, growing gathering each month, in the Indianapolis market, certainly there were people maybe showed up to push a business card because they saw another outlet for their networking. If people were not coming in just kind of from a genuine place of curiosity and learning about innovation, we really did see several folks that just naturally selected out of the group. It wasn't an intentional, inviting of a certain type, and it certainly wasn't intentional to keep those folks away. It just, it was the fit for the right people.
Right.
And now certainly later on as the group grew and going into conferences and bigger events, I mean, that's where we got a little more strategic with marketing and a promotion, knowing that, we really started with a handful of corporate innovators or entrepreneurs, if you will. And so that, is still one of the biggest target markets for the group. So really, identifying folks that are maybe newer to a position of, say, a director of innovation for a larger corporation in the market. And so there is some intentionality now about beyond, just that word of mouth. I would say the one piece that really is the common thread through the whole story of Centric and one, as far as like, who is our audience is always a common question. And, I can look at it's very diverse as far as industry and background. Certainly it skews more to established businesses than it is startups or entrepreneurs. But you see a lot of larger nonprofits. And so it's not just your typical for-profit corporations. But I'd say the one common thread is, the community we built was kind of likened to the island of misfit toys, where you get a lot of these companies will have that person in an innovation role, but they're kind of the crazy one, right? They're the idea person, the wild, ideas on the whiteboard, at the company. And then they came to our group and realized, wow, there's others like me. These other companies have someone just like me. And so there was that common meeting place to say, we're, again, we're the misfits, the crazy ones, right? So, but I always did like that island of misfit toys analogy.
Yeah, I don't know what that says about you that you end up being the leader of this island of misfit toys, but you're the ultimate misfit toy. But I think it says,
I guess, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But so you got the right people in, or people self-selected whether they should continue to stay involved. But certainly once you have people involved and you're seeing that you can make this progress, you're probably trying to figure out, well, how do we keep this going? How do we continue to motivate and encourage people to do something tangible and do something that really has some kind of meaning behind it together. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? How did you keep people engaged?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just thinking through again, this 12-year history of the group, and they're still going strong. I think a lot of that was just we did kind of build up programming, in part just based on the demand and the fact that more and more people were coming, and hey, we have the opportunity to invite speakers in. Okay, now who are we going to go hear from, kind of thing. But I'd say so that was the starting point of okay, what are the topics and who are the people we want to go out and attract. Also, since we had a lot of large corporations involved in the first place, that immediately opened up the gate to the folks like the director of R&D for Delta Faucet, type companies, so Fortune 500 level companies that were able to come in and share some of their knowledge. But I would say, with that starting point of that frustration with Centric, right, of hey, how do we elevate the recognition of Indiana? As we began to formalize this group. And we did file as a nonprofit back in 2012. So they have been a 501c3 since early 2013. So thinking about, okay, how do we continue to add value and scale this organization? It really was about adding value as far as programming or offerings. And so we knew, look, recognition for Indiana is kind of that ultimate goal, but kind of the path or tactics behind that is we can better connect and educate the folks doing the innovating, then that is one of those, that's kind of the end result. And so the connection kind of took care of itself, right? That was the fact that it was, people coming together anyway. But certainly it was that intentionality behind this is, we like to say, sector agnostic organization. This was not focused on one industry, especially being innovation. We often, the assumption was we were a technology focused group. Certainly, it's safe to say all companies, industries are tech enabled in some way at this point, but when you have, the local symphony orchestra or the local art museums or United Way, some of these other, groups and organizations that you would never associate with, corporations or technology companies, these are some of the other folks showing up. So, really keeping it diverse. But then as far as programming, it really was, as we were introduced to, like design thinking, for example, has been a growing trend and now very, recognized and accepted framework. It was pieces of that, taking trending frameworks or, methods of innovation and weaving that into the programming, finding the right folks that were kind of, the thought experts, the leading experts as far as facilitating pieces of that, various elements. Innovation related gets to cover a lot of things. So design thinking, play, improv, business model canvas. There was as long as we knew we were, kind of elevating folks up to the right as far as innovation knowledge or, skills, with the framework, we continue to add that. We also started to add some celebratory pieces, some recognition pieces. So we launched the Indiana Innovation Awards, really providing a platform to recognize the output of innovation across the state. Again, this was 100% modeled off the Chicago Innovation Awards that have been around about 8-10 years longer than we have. But just a great platform that no categories by industry, no product categories. I mean, we've had everything from a shrimp farm winning alongside a SaaS tech startup, to a charter school, to a roller coaster. So it's been awesome to see just, where innovation in all the shapes and forms is taking across the state. And also looking at programming, we built a full day conference called Day of Innovation. Initially it was to give the awards a home, but then really, developed, it's Centric's marquee, program each year. So it takes place in the fall every year in Indianapolis.
It sounds so the recognition piece, I definitely think that that's interesting that along the way you figured out, we need to incorporate this. This will not just, we know it's not just going to help rev things up and make them feel excited about stuff, compel them to stay engaged, but it's part of what helps people to feel like they belong, Another aspect of community that we talk about a lot in association chat, and really anything in the association world, it has to do with this trust element, And so what role did trust play? I mean, what did you do to help cultivate trust with this community? Because I imagine you had people who, in some cases, they may have felt like they couldn't share everything, or they need to be careful of trade secrets or something, So how did you help cultivate trust so that there was more collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's interesting there. You ask about kind of the individual level. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think, I mentioned earlier, we were an environment that I think kind of had a natural culture of just the folks that were showing up. So, if people weren't there for the right reason or, not at that level of sharing, they kind of self-selected out. I guess when, looking at this and thinking through this ahead of our chat, I guess I was thinking more of it from the organizational level and, the
Yeah.
role Centric plays in the community. And I think that trust, has really been built in from day one as we were building out this resource for innovation. I think there's always been a recognition that, look, yes, we have an organization, we're trying to scale this, we're trying to fund it, we're trying to grow it, but we're not the only game in town. And I think that innovation doesn't happen behind walls. It doesn't happen when we disengage from the world. It happens when we engage with the world. And I think it's better to be that dot connector. And so Centric has always been a good collaborator. Yes, we're planning certain programs, certainly the conference when it's a bigger event. It's being conscious of other events and schedules and happenings. We're not trying to go head to head with other groups, but we also maintained an event calendar, and we were just as happy to point people to other meetups or conferences taking place in Indiana, central Indiana or across the region that says, look, if you're trying to learn, be a better innovator, here's other groups and organizations you should plug into, and really, has developed into this resource of not just, good programming ourselves, but also the place that's going to connect you with other outlets to learn and become a better innovator. So I think it's more around that collaboration and versus competition when it came to
Right.
being one of the groups in the landscape of groups and meetups.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and that totally makes sense because I think when people show up to that sort of thing, they kind of are saying they want to play. They want to be a
Mhm.
part of it. But, it's definitely something where do you choose to invest your time? Is it the sort of place that you should? And so this ongoing question of, do I trust, my engagement with this organization? Do I trust the organization? Do I trust the people around me? And so it sounds like you were really good about establishing yourselves in the very beginning as this is a place where it's for true collaboration. So if you've got that already like set up and you're ready for success in that regard, what about encouraging innovation? Like that's a challenge because
Yeah.
even if somebody says they're wanting to opt in and head toward that, that's kind of like that's a high hurdle, right? What's innovative and like what are so how did you go about that so that it didn't become something that was maybe overwhelming or scared people off?
Yeah, no, good question. Because I mean, that is one of those words or one of those concepts. You ask 100 people to define innovation, you're going to get like 110 different answers.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, so I think that especially what we've learned in recent years, and we've actually started having local companies coming to Centric to say, hey, help us organize. We're trying to build a culture of innovation at our within our walls. Can you guys do such a good job of this? Help us come in and can you come in and help organize, facilitate meetings to do that? And we also ran a peer group, or a kind of executive level peer group. So getting folks together from non-competitive settings to, really the decision, top decision level to say, okay, what are your challenges? How are you, building that culture of innovation? And so kind of having that front row seat, for many years leading Centric, I would say that, I think the one, the path to, installing or really encouraging innovation, it's, I think it's a baby step process to say, to someone coming in from the outside, because, in my role, I can sit and talk about design thinking or business, lean and, design sprints. And I'd nod my head and know exactly what someone's talking about. But,
Yeah.
you have to recognize that there's also folks, whether it be business leaders or certainly employees and associates as a business leader starting to implement that, they've never seen the words design and thinking in the same sentence together. And
Right.
so we've
They're
got
probably
to
like, what is design thinking? And you had to think
absolutely.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we know there are, some of those more the basic building blocks or, just the skill sets of just simply, creativity or problem solving, collaboration, right?
Mhm.
Or, ideation, just to how do you come up with a bunch of ideas before you even plug them into a framework to do something with. And so, right, kind of developing a Rolodex, if you will, of just programs and activities that can start introducing more the building blocks of innovation and
Mhm.
kind of baby step your way into more of these formal methods or frameworks to, again, start with, starting with ideation or just the, divergence and convergence when it comes to ideas, and then you step into the full design thinking framework, for example. So I'd say that has been definitely a pretty valuable learning experience from us as we've built programs over the years, and now have worked with individual corporations and their teams to say, okay, kind of here is this process that makes sense to folks.
I do love the design thinking process because it does provide that framework, a little bit of organization to help guide you along the way. One thing you'd mentioned was making sure that you gave people an opportunity, though, to meet them where they're at, not necessarily just, start talking about assuming that they all understand all the concepts of design thinking and what design thinking is, and saying, this is really about these pieces of it, which is how are we, ideating? How are we like getting all the good ideas out? And so a quick aside for anybody who's watching live. So like Anne, Reed, you guys, if you have questions along the way, you can always write in the chat box. You can always ask in the Ask a Questions tab, and I'll be checking those along the way. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Yay. And so, so what I wanted to go into next was talking a little bit more about what you found as being a challenge. I mean, certainly when you think about you're bringing together people who are already wanting to collaborate. There are some of these great minds who are creative, inventive, are coming from different industries. So this already sounds like the best party ever that you could continue to go to. Like, I want to go to the island of the misfit toys. But it's not all fun and games, right? I mean, there had to be some challenges that you came up against, and there had to be some times where you're like, wow, I didn't see that coming. So maybe share with us a little bit about what was like the most challenging aspect of managing a community like this.
Yeah, and honestly, and it's funny, I'm going to sound like a startup founder here. Just go to funding. But Centric, as I mentioned, is a nonprofit organization, and so right, we're building this community as a nonprofit, and so certainly with very little resources, especially financial resources, and so that's been the biggest challenge of knowing that there is a lot of value that Centric has provided over the years. We know that because people have come and they've told us, and and brought us back and keep coming back. So we know there's value there. But in the nonprofit world, we don't save puppies for children, and so it's a tougher sell, right, when it comes to some of the traditional paths of funding a nonprofit. And so a group like Centric is better suited for corporate sponsorships, and even grants. And some of that has been a tougher road to identify some of those opportunities. And events are great, but events really pay for themselves and provide a little bit to keep the lights on. But as far as scaling an organization, events are just tough. Even if you're talking about big conferences, it's really tough to think about capacity building with event revenue. And so that's been the biggest challenge, and still remains that. Unfortunately, part of why I'm no longer full time at Centric is just due to some of those funding challenges. So it's a great group that's still doing a lot of great things, but it's just working that line as a small nonprofit.
It is. That is such a. We hate to have to admit that something that's so amazing, that's so encouraging innovation and certainly bringing people together to solve some of the new problems that we have that we're facing in this world. What is a better goal than that? And yet, how do you keep the lights on? How do you keep things rolling? And Anne says that she's over here nodding her head too. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of us, can identify with that, especially if you run a nonprofit, are at the head of an association, and you're trying to figure out, how do we keep things going and growing and stay innovative? It all takes money, right? So that was the challenging aspect. What was maybe something that surprised you in a positive way? What was something that you learned along the way that maybe you didn't expect?
Yeah, another great question. And actually, earlier I mentioned just some of the different industries that are frequently involved with Centric and regularly show up to events, and actually have now been tapped to lead some events and workshops based on what they're doing. But I would say, the surprising element that early on, some of your non-traditional industries started showing up. And actually, Doug McColgan is one gentleman. He was one of the early presidents of Centric and had the opportunity to speak at TEDx Indianapolis and gave a talk just around networking is not working, and how really using Centric as the model of his talk, but just that importance of getting out of your box, right? I mean, talking to strangers and connecting with other departments or other industries. But he shared a story that we all kind of share at Centric. Early on, there was a community leader started showing up, and this gal led one of the local symphony orchestras and was part of development there, and started showing up to what we kind of had at that time was this business organization. And and he shares it in his talk is like, why are you here? Why are you at this business group if you're over here in the arts? Yeah. And her answer was brilliant and really speaks volumes for Centric, and really, again, that surprise that shifted our thinking about who to get involved. But she just said, if I continue to go to events in my industry, right, that's all people that think like I do. And if I want to think differently, I need to go to different events. And so I think it was just, okay, wow, it's really, keeping us accountable to walking the walk, walking the talk, if you will. But I think that was a great surprise early on. And even today, I mean, I'd say that's one of Centric's biggest markets are the larger arts-based or just nonprofit, corporations. Because again, when it comes to putting together new products or services, some of these United Way chapters, I mean, they're just as big as a large manufacturer. You just at the surface level don't think of them that way. But look, you have a nonprofit with 2,000 employees. That's no different than someone making a widget with 2,000 employees. There's a lot of the same challenges.
Yeah, a lot of the same challenges, a lot of the same and new problems as we bring in new types of technology and even new behaviors in our society. We have these new challenges that are showing up every day. And so how fast can we get people together to start solving them, right? And start providing these answers. I think something that you said made me want to dig in a little bit more into how you've maybe applied this into your own life, because I can imagine that. So somebody says, well, if I keep going to the same places, I'm going to learn the same things. I need to change things up a little bit. I need to get into some new pools, some new waters. How has that impacted you? Has that actually changed the way that you look to go connect with people, or that have you explored new territories that you wouldn't have otherwise taken up juggling? I don't know.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And I would say, I guess coming into it, I guess, a little similar to some of the other, original folks at Centric, that, kind of a shared curiosity about learning and just, learning new ways of doing things. But I would say, especially with Centric and getting to know more folks from more places, just that kind of that intentional curiosity, or, how do you kind of manufacture that serendipity of running into new people? And I would say, yes, it's definitely trying to, go to different events or meetups or finding things on Eventbrite locally, and how do you put yourself in a different setting? I would say I learned early on in this growing emphasis on startups, and certainly Indianapolis, a fast growing market for tech startups, going to pitch events, those are great learning opportunities. That, hey, it's no matter what you're working on, you go find a pitch event, you see a slate of people that identified a problem. They're telling you what solution they built for it and how they plan to, solve that problem. That's not always a good solution. It's not always a good problem that they're trying to solve. But at the end of the day, you're getting to see this, at least innovation in a nutshell in a few minutes. But I think it's also, look, there's no shortage of opportunities to go plug in and meet, different folks and different events. I think one thing I love to do when I'm traveling, if I know I'm going to be in a city for a few days, hop on Meetup or Eventbrite and just see what's out there. One of my favorite events I've literally stumbled into was out in Las Vegas for a convention, and there's a form of talks called Pecha Kucha Nights. Pecha
Kucha, yeah.
Found one of those that UNLV was hosting, and it was simply 10 professors and faculty members from UNLV. They got the stage to just talk about anything and everything that they're working on and researching. And being in Las Vegas, I mean, we had, I think one was talking about with space research and the solar system, but then you also had the science of gambling. So it's just fascinating that just that learning opportunity to see stuff from a field totally different than mine. And so I do personally try and keep that as a practice of just getting to different events, and even Collision where we met earlier, right? I mean, that's it's pretty accessible. It's not a bad drive, from the Midwest to get up to Toronto to a big event, and being able to access events like that. I regularly go, Chicago, Cincinnati, taking advantage of the big cities, in the area to just join events.
Yeah. And Anne's watching and she says, you're using all my favorite words: curiosity, growth, learning, and intentional. Yes, of course. Yeah. It's interesting because periodically we all get super busy and stuff. And I have some pet projects that I really love that I mean, association chat's one of them, that I really love to spend a lot of time on and think about and kind of puzzle around like what I want to do. But occasionally I try to look for something totally crazy off the beaten path just to stay fresh and just to like let me read a book on this thing that I have really no interest or background in. Or my favorite thing that I've failed at so far is juggling, because I brought that up earlier because it's something that I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to juggle. This has nothing to do with me making money in any way. This has nothing to do, I don't know that it's really going to help me a ton, but just that it's totally unlike anything else. Right. And I think that keeps your brain fresh. I think it keeps you always learning, and once I learn how to juggle, then I'll be happy to do it and entertain everybody in between interviews. Yeah. So let's talk about community. So you have this amazing group of people that you're continuing to push and grow, and you've been learning from it along the way. What did you learn from observing this group of people coming together over and over again? What did you observe about community in your time with Centric, and then also with the other groups that you're involved with?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, sticking with that theme of just, this cross-sector aspect of Centric, I think certainly there's, that element of, look, innovation is happening everywhere and innovators are everywhere. So I think that, there shouldn't be limitations based on, an industry label or a title label on, who can come in and do the work of solving problems within an organization. And I would say beyond that, to say that everyone is an innovator, I would say one thing I've learned just with lots of events over the years and experiencing it firsthand and then seeing it firsthand, that, we all are in fact creative and we all are in fact innovative, but, we've kind of been trained out of that, or, we've scared ourselves out of that. Right. If you look at, going back and certainly there's no shortage of commentary on this, but right, you go back to elementary school and little kids are some of the most creative, and, we get trained out of that because we have to color in the lines. But, when you get to watch events, maybe an improv based workshop, or, good facilitators that can get adults out of their shell, I think there's a lot of truth that, look, if you can be re-inspired, retaught that to be creative, man, that carries back to you to the office, that, just the output of innovation is just exponential once you can kind of relearn that. I would say also part of that curiosity and exploration, my personal path beyond Centric, was able to get plugged into the adult summer camp scene about 5 years ago. And my wife and I found one, started in California, then they opened up one in a chapter in North Carolina. But, going to one of these adult summer camps for 3 years in a row, really did, a lot of personal growth just from that, not only just play, but just such an incredible setting to get out of your comfort zone, to do things that you've never done before, whether it be, the center of a skit in front of 300 strangers, or, whatever.
I love that. I love that.
And so I think there is, right? I mean, a lot of that, comfort zone, and how are you doing things to get out of your comfort zone? Again, whether that's talking to a group of 10 or 20 people for the first time, or that's talking to a group of 100 or 200 people for the first time, or just one of those creative activities that feels a little awkward. It's like, oh, I can't be the one that does this. I can't draw. I can't come up with these ideas. And when you get to participate in activities that really again kind of re-teach you that you can, there's a lot of power in that.
So wait, so do you still go to these adult summer camps?
I unfortunately no. The particular
No.
one we went to is no longer around. I guess I am part of a global network on Hive Global Leaders. So to give them a shameless plug for that group, an amazing group that actually weaves a lot of mindfulness and personal connection, some of the camp elements, if you will, into leadership and really purpose-driven innovation.
Hive Global Leaders. I'm going to have to look into that. That sounds so cool, though. You talked about the adult summer camp, and I thought about it, and I thought that would be great. That would be the place where you'd be picking up things like juggling and trying things you've never tried before. Like over,
100%.
I mean, I just think that's so great.
And I'd say we have good friends in Indy. They run a outdoor adventure company for women, and one of their taglines is when's the last time you did something for the first time?
Oh,
and
that's good.
There's a lot of truth in that.
Good.
And one of my favorite innovators, just from the Centric network, there's a director of innovation from one of the large aerospace companies, engineering background, and one of these companies just employs all engineers.
Yeah.
And he talks about he goes out of his way not only to make himself uncomfortable, where he'll even position himself in an elevator to stare at everyone just to make it awkward, or he takes a lesson during the week. But he recognizes that kind of his background in engineering and mathematics, and if he wants to be a better innovator, he's constantly looking for ways to stretch his comfort zone and practice some creative abilities. And it's just such a great example of someone that gets it. And again, perfect fit for our Island of Misfit Toys back here in Indiana.
Yeah, no kidding. So speaking of which, how are you continuing to work with community and innovation today? So, post-centric, now you're part of this thing called InnoPower. And so talk to me about what you're doing with that today, because what you've done, this whole history and career of building this up, it didn't just disappear. It's evolved into something else.
Yeah, for sure. And so still very much, working in the state of Indiana and in that effort of community building or innovation community building. So really the two hats now wearing with that. So InnoPower was an initiative launched this year. We had a conference 2 months ago in Indianapolis, and now thinking through, okay, what's next? So the answer to that's to be determined. We don't know.
Yeah.
But InnoPower is really focused on inclusivity when it comes to the innovation ecosystem in a region. Unfortunately, Centric, even an organization that I was responsible for running for many years, and others like us, right? We're direct reflection of our networks. And so when it comes to some of the diversity, right? I mean, you look around and it's folks like myself, and just a natural extension of networks. But right, how can we be intentional about providing a seat at the table for lots of others in the community? Whether it be workshops and training, or it be startup competitions and pitch contests and things of that nature. But it's how do we get more of the community involved in that and really diversify the community, if you will. And then the other organization, Society of Innovators at Purdue University Northwest, is up in the northwest corner of the state near Chicago. I'd say it's actually very similar to Centric, just a different part of the state. But I guess the biggest difference, other than geography, is that this group now has a much larger stake in the overall regional economic development of the region, whereas Indianapolis, a much bigger city than the northwest Indiana suburbs of the up there. So it's just a less crowded market. So it's exciting. I'm newer. I'm just 2 months into that role, so it's exciting to kind of start building new community and adding on to what they've already done up here, and knowing that we have the opportunity to have much greater impact on the economy up here.
I believe it. So I'm guessing that when people reach out to you and want to hire you to come in and talk with their organizations, one of the first questions that they have is, Well, where do we start?
Mhm.
Where do we even begin on building in more innovation for our organizations? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I go back to my comments earlier, right? I mean, it's thinking about, okay, what are those building blocks of problem solving? If you want to,
Hmm.
I guess that's, get away from the buzzword of innovation. It comes down to, critical thinking, problem solving. But I think it's really, partnering alongside. And that's, again, something we saw more and more in recent years of companies, even some large, well-known companies coming to us that maybe for the first time have hired a director of innovation type role. And,
Hmm.
that person coming to us say, man, I'm tasked with building this culture of innovation at this large company. How do I do that? And it is kind of that path, or, stepping stones of, starting with the basic concepts of collaboration, and then kind of building into more formal frameworks. And I guess it's also recognizing that there's no one silver bullet, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
one thing Centric was always good at, and I think built into some of that trust as well, in that we weren't out there selling anything, right? There was no one proprietary framework that we were pushing that was developed. Our goal was just to put as many tools in the toolbox for problem solving as we could.
Hmm.
And so I think that the more that you can learn, the more you can be introduced to, then you're just better equipped to come in and solve problems within an organization. And so there's also part of that of just how can you, introduce, the innovation leaders of the company, how can they introduce, to the, the rest of the organization, to just all the various, frameworks and skills and tools of being able to come in and innovate or problem solve.
So let's problem solve this. What
Yeah.
is your favorite problem that you're trying to solve right now?
That is a good question. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I mentioned that InnoPower and Society of Innovators. I guess with both, right? I mean, these are newer roles, and InnoPower is brand new, so this is a startup community, and so now we're really just okay. How do we start establishing a community again?
Yeah.
Obviously from a much different place, much more well established and better connected than we were years ago, kind of the early days of Centric, but also being more, intentional about that diversity inclusion message, and, making sure that the right people and the right programs are in place. But I would say, yeah, that's the problem. Or maybe it's not a problem. It's just that's the opportunity and
Yeah.
challenge ahead of us is, how do we, start building a healthy community after, using the momentum of this initial conference. And, I'd say personally too, it's, on the Society of Innovators side, it's a great organization. It's been in place about as long as Centric, but I'm just new to this region of the state. So it's
Hmm.
just that opportunity to get out and learn the who's who and the what's what, and how do I start connecting the dots in a different part of the state.
I love that. I love that. I didn't give you any heads up on that question. So, I mean, that was a really awesome answer. And I think when you think about the questions that you have that are around you that you're really trying to solve right now, I have this very specific question that I'm trying to solve. I think that once you figure out what that is, whatever it is, it kind of makes it a little bit more fun because when you approach it as, more than just this thing that's like a challenge that's in the way, but it becomes the problem you're working, like kind of like in math, it becomes this is the thing that you're trying to solve for. It I don't know. And maybe that's just me. Yeah. I might be losing everybody right now. I'm not sure. But I feel like it kind of gives it enough of objectivity, maybe, that it gives it this ability that you can, yeah, I'm just going to drop this right now, where you can solve it better. Okay, so enough with that. If people want to reach out to you, they want to bring you in to talk about innovation, work with their organizations, or just say, I think that you're amazing, Jason, everything that you're doing, and I want to connect with you. Where can they go to find out more about you? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, well, there's two totally different apps. You want to tell me I'm amazing, I'll give you one. If you want to say the other, No, seriously, no, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be on. So all the hats I wear, I do conveniently have them, one-stop shop under my personal brand of Jawbrain. So jawbrain.com or at Jawbrain on all the things online, and that's just JAW Brain. And then the next question is commonly, what does that mean? What's that name all about? Jaw is my initials, and being a career marketer, Jawbrain was short, catchy, and available when I was starting out trying to find a landing place. But that's where you can find all about the various initiatives I'm working on, also some of the personal services and offerings that I have as far as facilitating and speaking. But yeah, that's the best place to go.
That's awesome. I love it. And I'm going to send you a juggling kit so that you can be a bad juggler just like me. Unless you already know how to. Do you know how to juggle?
No, I don't know. Nothing I've formally ever tried to learn, but definitely not a skill that comes naturally.
It definitely does not come naturally. Yeah. It's one of those things that if I ever accomplish the ability to juggle, I'm going to be a really bad juggler though still. I promise you. So thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I feel like I've learned so much more about what you've done with Centric, with InnoPower, with community and innovation in general. And I've learned about adult summer camp and Hive, which I need to check out a little bit more about Hive too. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to all of you. Anne says, I loved it, learned a lot. Thanks. Thank you, Anne. I hope you've learned something helpful today that's going to help you today and every day after. And until next time, everyone, keep asking questions to learn every day. As Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. All right. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kiki.
Thank you.